For those of you who don't know, I am not Mr. Beast, as your title says. I saw.
Well, crazy. Okay. Well, what did you what do you want to talk about specifically today?
All right. Well, I just think the most important thing is voting reform. If we don't, it's in terms of. I always hear lots of back and forth about various issues, and it seems like a lot of times to me that it's kind of pointless unless you're gonna tackle the whole system. And when I mean the whole system, I mean these people that are in the federal government specifically. I'll focus on that because state governments is all different. Some states are better than others. But in the federal government, for the most part, for a long time, at least a generation, so your whole entire life, my entire life, there's been people in there that just don't seem to really represent us. They represent, select people, special interest groups, whoever happens to give them lots of money, gets them reelected. And this is a lot of times it's easier for us to just blame these individual politicians. I think the whole system has really been bad for a long time. We just don't realize it. Like I bring up the Electoral College a lot, which is easier for us to understand how that's archaic and not representative. But gerrymandering is another thing that I don't think even gets enough attention. Like we should be talking about gerrymandering all the time. And then, of course, it's only gotten worse with the last. I did a live stream a few weeks ago where they finally released all the results of all the redistricting based on the census numbers from last year. It was already a year behind, and it's worse now than it's ever been in the history of the country. And so members of Congress have introduced bills trying to tackle this. It's not easy because a lot of times it would be fought in courts, but I wanted to bring attention. There's still bills out there that could fight gerrymandering. Have you heard any of these bills?
I know that it's an issue that people fight about. We can talk about gerrymandering a bit if you want. Actually, that's kind of an interesting topic for me. I super disagree with you on almost all these topics, so I'm interested in the in the conversation. I'm really curious.
Awesome. I usually find myself agreeing with you when I've watched some of your stuff. So
yeah. I used to think one way. Maybe you can bring me back on it. Who knows? We'll see. Okay. So here's an interesting thing about gerrymandering. I know that people get really upset about how obviously there are wildly drawn districts that I'm sure you've seen like a top 10 worst districts map and the crazy drawings, everything. So here's like a question. Fundamentally, what should a district be? What should a district look like? What is a fair district? These might be the same question, or these might be totally different questions. What do you think? Like, what should a district look like in a state?
I don't think it's possible to have a fair district. What you could do is strive for fairness by having people in government that people want to be there. So, like the majority. So, I do believe in like that. Like a lot of people actually don't think democracy is actually fundamentally that great. I tend to lean on the side that it is. I mean, I don't want direct democracy on. Basically, if it's local, direct democracy works really well, but at federal, no, we are not ready for that. But yeah, like I think, I mean, here's the thing. This is also why I wanted to bring up ranked choice voting or star voting. Are you familiar with, I know you're familiar with ranked choice voting, but are you familiar with star voting?
No. You can explain it to me though.
It's even better than ranked choice voting. Yeah, it's basically, it's a combination of ranked choice voting and approval voting, basically. So the acronym star voting, it stands for, score, which is another word for approval voting. So I should say score voting. So score, then automatic runoff, which is the same thing as ranked choice voting.
Gotcha.
So my whole point of supporting both star voting and ranked choice voting is that whenever we choose anything in life, we like more than one thing. So it's not like it's like, I only like Dr. Pepper. I will never drink anything else. I hate all other sodas. But for some reason, elections are treated that way. It's plurality voting, which we just get one pick in the general election, unless you're actually going to be active with the primaries, which There's a lot of obstacles for that. And so I think we should have multiple, like a lot of times it'd be great if our second choice was in there and we wouldn't be as upset with each other. Like somebody who, and a lot of times somebody is voting against the other, like they're just so scared, like in 2020 presidential election. A better example is 2016, I think.
Sure.
Because you just had so many people that were afraid of the other candidate. I think honestly, Trump, that's why he lost in 2020, because so many people were afraid of the second term.
Voting against him for sure.
Yeah, they weren't excited about Joe Biden. However, like let's take the 2020 example. In the primaries on the Democratic side, you had other choices. You had Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, all these other candidates that people all individually have different preferences, but they would rank them, and you'd like to think that, hey, if my top choice didn't get in there, then maybe my second or third choice would get in there. And I would not be as terrified, like voting, like knowing that, oh, hey, if my top choice doesn't get in, at least maybe my second or third choice will, then my fifth or sixth choice, who I actually am afraid of, will not get in. So it would lead, a lot of people say, well, that would lead to more centrist candidates. Well, I don't know. Like centrism is a kind of just a stupid word that means different things. I just think it means, I'm somebody who's a pragmatist. I like to build consensuses, coalitions, because it gets stuff done.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Instead of just the
gridlocking hard on like different people. Yeah.
Exactly. So anyway,
just curious. So going back so broadly, I think broadly, well, this is always the issue, is that broadly people agree on most things, but when it gets into like the nitty gritty, I think we start to see that like, well, the actual answer to things is a lot more complicated than maybe we'd want it to be. So I guess like kind of going back to the question I had, what is a fair district, or what should a district look like in a state? Like how should it be divided? I think that's a really difficult question.
It is.
So here I guess here are a couple things that I've heard, and then you can speak on this. So some people would say that like, well, a district should be like a real thing, right? Like if I'm in, how long did you live in Omaha?
Like 4 years.
Okay. Do you know like the Millard area or Omaha or Elkhorn or
Yep.
I think Ashton or like Bellevue, right? If I say I'm from there, it kind of means something, right? Like it's a certain city, different cities have different cultures, different ethnic groups of people, different thing. Exarban might be an area, right? You got like the zoo, like there are like these areas in the city that like mean things. And that's just in the city, right? So some people say like, oh, a district should be like a cohesive thing that people can identify with. I'm from, Nebraska District 3, or I'm from this district, whatever. And then when you look at like some maps and you see how districts are cut up, it's like, okay, well, this is insane. Like nobody is going to identify with the people over here that's like cut into this narrow strip. But then other people will point out that like, okay, well, so we can draw districts that mean something. We can draw like those districts where people have a feeling of belonging to a particular geographic region. But the problem is that those districts are going to be ultra unfair. Because what happens is liberals tend to live in very concentrated liberal areas. Conservatives tend to be a lot more spread out. So if you draw districts in ways that like geographically kind of make sense, you're going to end up with like heavily partisanly district areas that are destroying liberals' abilities to have representation in the House of Representatives. Because if like all of your liberal districts are drawn with 80-90% liberals, and all of your conservative districts are drawn with 60% conservatives, your liberals are right? Because you've got too many crunched together, right? I'm sure you understand like how that, yeah. So then the question becomes, I think you're in this weird conundrum where I think it's usually presented as, especially as of recent, it's usually presented as like, well, conservatives are trying to gerrymander everything because they want to disenfranchise people's right to vote. But if you draw like actual geographically coherent districts, you're actually going to like, if those districts actually up liberals' abilities to vote hardcore. So the onus is a little bit on the liberal to draw kind of wackier districts in order to have fair representation. I'm not trying to say any of these are necessarily bad or good, but it kind of brings me back to that question to where, because I know people feel very strongly about how districts are drawn. I'm always curious about the answer to that question, like, well, what is actually a fair district? Like, how should a district be drawn such that, like, I feel good? Like, what if there's a way to draw districts that, like, geographically feel really good, but representationally are fucking horrible, versus other districts that are like, okay, well, now we've got, like, good representation, but, like, when you look at them on a map, they're the wackiest districts in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, there's you ask a really good question. I mean, that is one of the questions, but there are algorithms, there are mathematical ways to do it. There's a website, actually, I had forgot about it, so I Googled it, but it's called Auto Redistrict. Have you heard of that one?
I probably haven't heard of it by name, but I know that there are people that write algorithms because the idea is to district things as fairly as possible without having, like, partisan people at the head trying to get favorable electoral outcomes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, anybody can get on there and mess with it. It's free and open source. Essentially, there's two things they aim for: geometry. So you want it to be a district that's compact, that has approximately equal population. Which, I don't know if you realize this as well. In the United States, the sizes of districts in terms of number of people varies quite a bit. Like, one might have, you have Wyoming, for example, which the whole state's a district, which is about 550,000 people, and then you have I think a couple districts in the east that are well over 1 million people. So geometry, and then equality, which that's where I think your question, where it gets really tricky, because, like, we like to think, well, I should say political scientists generally like to think they can predict how people will vote based on their ethnicity, their gender, their different characteristics.
Education, everything, yeah. Locate, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of times you can't. And because especially with swing voters, because a lot of times swing voters, they're not very politically engaged, so they're just kind of like, I guess I'll try this one this time. Try this one. And so that trying to make it competitive is the most tricky part. And I would say that it's not perfect, but it's what we have. And so as long as we have districting, I think we should at least try for, like, something like, like the website or the computer program Auto Redistrict does, where it tries to at least use math to try to make the districts as fair as humanly possible. I mean, the alternative we see in other countries, proportional representation, essentially, some kind of proportional representation. So you just, instead of, like, having districts drawn up in each state, you just have a number of representatives, and then everybody votes, and then based on I'm probably doing a horrible job explaining this, but based on how everyone votes, then there's just proportions of political parties that are represented in each state. So, for example, if California, if 75% of the votes go to Democrats, then they get, well, I guess you can round up if needed, but 75% of the seats go to the Democratic Party, 25% of the seats go to the Republicans, and it's just all at large, representing the entire state. Which, yeah, for a giant state like California or Texas, that has we're opening up a whole new can of issues. So that's not perfect either. But would you want to get rid of districts?
Districting is a really hard question. I don't know what the right answer is there, but I feel like wherever we start, I feel like the important question is, why do we have districts, and are those important? And I don't know if I've ever heard a good answer to that ever. Because my question would be to somebody that feels strongly about districts is, why not just have kind of what you say? Let's say that there are 20 representatives. Let's say there are 20, why doesn't the entire state of California? Oh, no, I guess that would be the answer. I guess I haven't thought through that before. Because I was going to say, why wouldn't the entire state of California just vote on all the representatives? But then if it's a left-leaning state, it would be 100% like all left-leaning representatives, I guess. That'd be the problem, huh? That's probably why you need districts. I guess I never thought through that before.
No, well, proportional, what you could do is you could just have a percentage, like, because there are.
Or you could do a
quite
percentage,
bit
but
of-
then how would you choose who? I guess you could have two separate elections where everybody votes for which candidates they prefer and then which party.
Exactly. It'd be like the primary systems we have for president. So their own political parties would have their own, however they want to do it to pick which. Yeah, that might be worse too,
Yeah, actually, I guess that could work, actually. You would just vote. You'd have two elections. One would be you'd vote, I guess, for your political party, and then the second would be you'd vote down your list of candidates, and then you'd take the combination of those two, and then you'd have your new representatives. Yeah, I don't know why, I guess, why we wouldn't opt for a system like that instead of what we have now. I don't know what the point of the districts are, because I can understand on a, maybe like on a state basis, because you might want representation of particular districts on a state legislature, but I don't know on a federal legislature. Like, do I really feel like the interests of a different district in California or Nebraska need to be represented that differently in front of like Congress? I'm not sure if I feel that or not, but maybe, but yeah. Like, I feel like so some people get really mad at me for this. I'm okay with the idea of like the Senate. I feel like different states, they have different separate governments, they have different separate incentives. I'm okay with the Senate existing to balance the interests between the states, but I don't know if interests within a state need to be represented in front of the federal government as much. I guess I just don't have that strong of a feeling, but yeah.
I kind of agree with you on that. I'm okay with the Senate existing, especially because you need something to protect smaller states. And I know we're biased because we're from two small states. But you even notice in Nebraska, they're doing something really great
yes.
for presidential elections. Yeah, like they divide up the electoral votes based on the districts.
Nebraska and Maine, yeah. I don't know why every state doesn't do that. Winner take all.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'll even defend the Electoral College for reasons, but like one thing I would super be okay with is I think every single state should split their vote. I don't know why it's ever winner take all for electoral votes. That's the dumbest thing in the entire world I've ever heard. Like, what a way to make people feel like their vote is a waste of time depending on the state they live in. I've never understood that.
Yeah, and we've seen last two elections. Well, I know 2020, Omaha voted differently than the rest of the state, and that's it makes sense. I will also bring up this really important point, though. We don't have enough representatives in the House of Representatives.
Yeah,
it's embarrassing. Like, so we have 435 members that are supposed to represent 330 million people. The last time that was increased was the Reapportionment Act of 1929. 1929, almost 100 freaking years ago. The population in 1929, I got to Google it, or 1920, it was a lot less than 330. Okay.
Wait, I'm going to take a guess. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Go ahead, take a guess.
Well, you just said 120 something, so I'm going to guess 125 million.
Oh, dang it. Yeah, 121.7 million. So we, and then of course we haven't even had 50 states for this whole time too. So like, and then since like the biggest trend in as far as migration patterns in the United States over the last 60, 70 years has been Americans moving out west and to the south of the Sun Belt. And so we're constantly seeing people moving. And so that means cultures are always changing. Like North Carolina today is dramatically different than even it was 30, 40 years ago. If you go to North Carolina today, you can tell, I mean, the older folks, just ask them, like it's nothing. And so, and we need more representatives is my whole point. We need to have at least, I would argue, one more representative in each state.
One more?
Well, yeah, we should a lot more. We could easily double the number of.
Yeah, I was gonna say we could add hundreds more. I feel like to the House for better representation. Especially, I would say, like if we are going to have the Senate and if we are going to have the Electoral College, I think there are very strong arguments for giving more representation to population in the House of Representatives. Like you already have an uneven like representation of smaller states in the Senate and in the EC. There's no reason why the House then can't be pretty weighted towards like the actual largely populated states.